War has always been more than violence. It is a transaction of power, a contest of minds, and a pursuit of wealth disguised as survival. From the moment humanity learned to organize, it also learned to conquer. Empires rose not simply to defend borders, but to control the flow of gold, grain, and ambition. Every weapon ever forged, every soldier ever trained, was paid for with the invisible currency of fear and dominance. Welcome to ARMORIA, where war meets intelligence. Here we do not glorify bloodshed, we dissect it. We decode the strategy, the technology, and the psychology behind humanity's oldest institution, the business of conflict. Because war, in its essence, has always been a negotiation of land, of lives, and of power. In every age, wealth has followed victory, and ruin has shadowed defeat. ARMORIA exists to trace that line, from swords to drones, from bronze to silicon, from kings to algorithms. This is not just history, it is the anatomy of control. The battlefield is where invention thrives, economies shift, and civilizations gamble their futures. Subscribe to ARMORIA, where knowledge is forged in fire, and understanding is the ultimate weapon. Long before nations minted coins or drew borders, humanity fought for the most ancient form of currency, survival. The first wars were not fought for flags or ideology, but for food, water, and land. When resources became scarce, power became a matter of possession. To control the fertile valley was to control life itself, and thus the earliest civilizations learned that conflict could purchase prosperity. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia were among the first to transform chaos into strategy. Around 2500 BC, they fielded organized armies, armored chariots, and professional soldiers, a human investment in dominance. These soldiers were not just warriors, they were instruments of economic control, extensions of a growing system that equated conquest with profit. Every spear cast was a statement of value, every captured city a bank of resources. The walls of Uruk and Lagash were more than fortifications. They were vaults protecting the wealth of their rulers. Egypt followed, its armies marching not only to defend the Nile but to expand the empire's treasury. Pharaohs understood what many rulers after them would perfect, that the cost of war was measured not only in lives, but in gold. Battles were expensive, but peace without tribute was even more costly. The spoils of victory financed temples, fed soldiers, and inspired more conquests. War had become an investment, and those who could afford it dictated history. As bronze gave way to iron, a revolution in metallurgy reshaped the balance of power. Iron was cheaper, stronger, and more abundant. The democratization of destruction. Armies grew larger, weapons spread faster, and the market of war expanded beyond kings to entire societies. The Greeks elevated strategy into art, transforming violence into philosophy. At Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis, they proved that discipline and intelligence could outweigh numbers and gold. Yet even they fought for trade routes, colonies, and influence, the ancient equivalents of modern economies. For Athens, war was a means of preserving commerce, ensuring that money and ideas flowed through the Aegean like lifeblood. Sparta, on the other hand, invested not in trade but in dominance, turning its citizens into living currency of the state. To be a Spartan was to be a weapon, and every victory was a deposit into the collective account of fear. Far to the east, the Persians built one of the first military industrial systems. Their empire ran on logistics, taxation, and the efficient conversion of wealth into war. Money built their roads, supplied their armies, and sustained their campaigns across 3 continents. To wage war was to manage an economy, and to lose was to face bankruptcy of power. By the time Rome emerged, war had already become the engine of civilization. The Roman legions were both soldiers and civil engineers, building roads that carried armies and trade alike. Conquest filled Rome's coffers with slaves, metals, and tribute. The Republic's rise was financed by expansion. Its peace was maintained through wealth extracted from others. When money poured in, the people celebrated. When it ran dry, rebellion followed. The Roman elite understood the arithmetic of domination, that every empire is, at its core, a marketplace of control. Yet behind every economic motive, there remained something primal, the hunger for immortality. Leaders sought not just riches but legacy, and war was the stage upon which their names could be purchased with blood. From Sumer to Sparta, from Egypt to Rome, each civilization learned the same lesson: that power without war is temporary, and wealth without defense is an illusion. The first age of conflict had ended, but its logic endured. That victory was not only a triumph of arms, but a transaction of influence. The currency of conquest had been minted, and the world would spend it endlessly. The discovery of gunpowder did not just change the sound of war, it changed its economy. When fire met iron, the battlefield became a factory, and killing became a question of production. The medieval knight, once a symbol of personal honor, was now outpriced by the cannon. Feudal glory could not compete with mathematics, and gold replaced courage as the measure of victory. Armies that once fought for faith now marched for finance. The cost of powder, metal, and manpower gave birth to an entirely new world order, one where kings became bankers and soldiers became investments. In Europe, the dawn of the gunpowder age was a dawn of bureaucracy. Monarchs centralized wealth to sustain permanent armies, and the modern state emerged from ledgers as much as from blood. France, Spain, and England learned that the battlefield rewarded not only bravery, but budgeting. Money became as critical as gunpowder. An empire could die not from defeat, but from debt. The 30 Years' War burned through both lives and economies, devouring entire regions of Europe and bankrupting dynasties that had ruled for centuries. Those who survived did so not because they prayed harder, but because they paid smarter. The logic of war had changed. Soldiers no longer fought for personal vengeance, but for payroll. Mercenaries, contractors, and financiers became as vital as generals. Behind every volley of musket fire stood a treasury, and behind every victory stood a loan. As weapons evolved, so did ambition. The age of exploration turned war into a global business. The ships that crossed oceans carried not only flags, but investments. Spices, gold, and slaves were traded as if they were resources of equal worth, and the empire became the ultimate corporation. The British and Dutch East India Companies blurred the line between government and business, proving that conquest could be outsourced for profit. Armies became shareholders in the violence that built the modern world. The gun, once a tool of defense, became an instrument of trade. Colonies were seized, continents divided, and cultures commodified, all in the pursuit of money masked as mission. Yet the new wealth brought new contradictions. Europe's coffers overflowed, but its people starved. The pursuit of global control created an internal war of class and hunger. In France, the revolution exploded not from musket fire abroad, but from economic collapse at home. The people who once financed kings now demanded to own their fate. War, for the first time, turned inward. The French Revolution industrialized not only violence but ideology. Conscription replaced mercenaries, nationalism replaced gold, and armies became the embodiment of the state's will. Napoleon Bonaparte understood better than anyone that power was a balance sheet of blood and resources. He waged campaigns with precision, feeding his armies from conquered lands, converting territory into sustenance, and war into self-funding momentum. His conquests created not only empires, but entire economic systems built on supply lines, taxation, and trade routes. When he marched, Europe paid attention, not only because of his strategy, but because of his spending. He proved that logistics could conquer nations faster than bullets, and that discipline was more valuable than raw fire. Yet even his genius could not escape the mathematics of attrition. Russia's winter was not a weapon, but an accountant. The campaign's failure was measured not only in bodies, but in bankrupt treasuries. Napoleon's fall was as financial as it was military. Across the Atlantic, the young United States learned the same truth during its own wars. Independence had been bought with both blood and debt. The new republic quickly discovered that to preserve freedom, it had to manage its finances as fiercely as its frontiers. Cannons and muskets required factories, factories required workers, and workers required wages. War fed industry and industry fed war, an eternal exchange of iron and income. The Industrial Revolution would soon make that connection absolute. The invention of the rifle, the rail, and the telegraph turned the battlefield into a network. Information moved faster than men, and money moved faster than kings. Wars could now be planned like enterprises, with logistics replacing heroism and profit guiding policy. The age of fire and discipline had not only reshaped combat, it had standardized it. The soldier became a unit of cost, the battle a line item in a nation's economy. To wage war was to gamble on prosperity, and victory was the dividend of efficiency. By the dawn of the 19th century, the world had learned a hard truth, that the greatest weapon was not the sword or the cannon. It was the ability to afford both. The future of war would belong to those who could mass-produce destruction, manage its expenses, and turn the art of killing into the science of control. By the dawn of the 20th century, war had become an industry, and the battlefield its assembly line. Machines replaced muscles, factories replaced forges, and the measure of strength was no longer the bravery of men, but the capacity of nations to manufacture death. The world had entered the industrial age of warfare, where engines roared louder than voices and steel mattered more than blood. When the Great War erupted in 1914, it was not only a clash of empires, but an audit of economies. Every shell fired was a coin spent, every trench dug a debt incurred. The cost of destruction was now calculated in tons of steel, barrels of oil, and billions of dollars. For the first time, the wealth of nations was converted directly into firepower. Industrialization had created a new kind of soldier, the worker. Men who once labored in textile mills now built rifles and tanks, transforming peacetime production into wartime profit. The factories of Europe became the true battlefields, where victory depended not on valor but on output. Money no longer followed war, it drove it. Governments printed promises, banks financed battles, and corporations became arsenals. The line between economy and strategy disappeared. In the mud of the Somme, men were expendable, but machines were priceless. The machine gun, the tank, and the airplane were not just inventions, they were investments. Every weapon carried the signature of an industry and the interest of investors. The world had discovered that war could generate not only loss, but income. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the silence was not peace, it was bankruptcy. Empires collapsed under the weight of their own expenses, and entire currencies crumbled like ruins. The Treaty of Versailles did not end war, it commodified it. Reparations became revenge disguised as economics, and Germany, stripped of money and pride, became fertile ground for another conflict. Within 2 decades, the world would learn that depression breeds desperation, and that desperation breeds dictators. The Second World War rose from the ashes of debt. Hitler's rise was financed as much by resentment as by resources. He promised not only power, but prosperity, rearming Germany with factories and fear. Industry became ideology, production became prophecy. As nations rearmed, the global economy once again turned to war as its cruelest form of employment. Every tank built in Detroit, every bomber assembled in Manchester, was both a weapon and a paycheck. The war machine became the ultimate employer, and profit marched alongside propaganda. When the world burned, its markets burned brighter. The Second World War was the most expensive enterprise in human history. It consumed entire economies, devoured resources, and yet, paradoxically, rebuilt them. The United States emerged not only victorious but wealthy, proving that capitalism could thrive on conflict. Its factories ran 24 hours a day, producing weapons, vehicles, and supplies that transformed destruction into revenue. The war effort was not just national duty, it was economic opportunity. Women entered the workforce, industries expanded, and innovation exploded. Radar, jet engines, nuclear power, all born from the union of necessity and investment. Meanwhile, Europe was left in ruins, its cities bankrupt, and its populations living on the currency of hope. Out of this devastation, a new system was born, one where global trade replaced empire and financial alliances replaced conquest. Yet even in peace, the machinery of war never stopped. The Cold War that followed was not a war of bullets, but of budgets. Superpowers raced to outspend each other, turning ideology into accounting. The arms race was a competition of credit, where missiles were built not because they were needed, but because they could be afforded. The nuclear bomb redefined value, a single device that could erase entire economies in seconds. Power was no longer measured in men or territory, but in megatons. The world lived under a balance sheet of terror, where stability depended on the illusion of mutual insolvency. In this new order, science replaced courage and fear replaced strategy. The United States and the Soviet Union became mirror images in ambition, their weapons stockpiled like currency reserves, their satellites orbiting as symbols of prestige and control. The Cold War was not only a standoff of armies, but a showcase of spending, a duel of innovation fueled by paranoia and profit. For defense contractors and politicians, war without fighting was the perfect investment. No victory required, no losses counted, only endless development, endless production, endless money. By the late 20th century, humanity had perfected the machinery of organized destruction. Technology advanced faster than diplomacy, and the engine of war became self-sustaining. Nations no longer needed reasons to fight, they needed only industries to maintain. The tank, the jet, the missile, each was a currency of influence, traded in fear and financed in ambition. The great powers had built economies so dependent on defense that peace itself had become unprofitable. The world had become an armed marketplace where contracts replaced treaties and profit replaced ideology. War had once been the failure of politics. Now it was its continuation by other means, and often by financial design. By the dawn of the 21st century, war had gone online. The battlefield no longer needed borders, trenches, or flags. It needed only a signal. Satellites replaced scouts, data replaced gunpowder, and money, now digital, invisible, instant, became the bloodstream of conflict. The age of the drone had begun. Machines now carried the burden of decision, flying through skies guided by algorithms instead of generals. Each strike could be launched with the click of a mouse, each death recorded like a transaction. The economics of destruction had finally achieved automation. Power was no longer about armies, it was about access to information, to code, to the networks that controlled both. Nations learned that dominance in cyberspace could buy what no army could seize: silence, secrets, and submission. In this new frontier, intelligence was currency, and attention was the new gold. Every byte stolen, every system breached, was worth more than the price of a missile. The battlefield had become a marketplace of invisibility. Armies still marched, but now beside them moved hackers, analysts, and satellites. Victory no longer depended on territory, but on the control of flows, data, capital, and energy. The drone replaced the tank, the keyboard replaced the rifle, and the war economy evolved once again, faster and quieter than ever before. Governments and corporations became indistinguishable partners in the new theater of control. Silicon Valley joined the Pentagon. Technology became strategy. Contracts worth billions were written in the name of defense, but driven by profit. The digital arms race was not fought for ideology, it was fueled by markets. Each new weapon system was not only a tool of war, but a business model, and each innovation justified its own expense. The line between protection and profit blurred completely. The wars of the modern age are fought as much on screens as in streets, and the weapons are not always physical. Disinformation, sanctions, artificial intelligence, all forms of influence traded like commodities. The true power now belongs to those who can shape perception faster than reality. In this era, control of truth is control of wealth. The propaganda that once required newspapers and radios now spreads through algorithms and feeds. Our digital post can reach more minds than any missile ever could. Fear, the oldest weapon of all, is now optimized for engagement. Money flows where outrage grows. The new generals are data scientists, the new soldiers are systems. Entire cyber armies are trained not to invade nations, but to infiltrate opinions. The defense budgets of the 21st century are measured not only in dollars, but in attention. The same companies that build our phones also build our surveillance. The same code that connects us also controls us. In the digital battlefield, everyone is enlisted and few are aware. Modern warfare has become profitable beyond imagination. Every conflict drives demand. Every tension sustains an industry. The global arms trade, once measured in ships and tanks, now includes software, satellites, and private data. The invisible hand of the market grips the trigger of every nation. Drones patrol borders that no human eye could cover, and each explosion is followed by an invoice. Money and war have merged completely, and peace itself has become a product too expensive to buy. Yet for all its technology, modern war still follows the same ancient law. Power belongs to those who can pay for it. The tools have changed. The logic has not. The same ambition that drove pharaohs to expand their kingdoms now drives corporations to expand their cloud servers. The same greed that filled the coffers of emperors now fills the accounts of defense contractors. Humanity has perfected the weapon, but not the wisdom to control it. Every drone in the sky carries not only a payload, but a price tag. Every algorithm written for security carries the potential for domination. The digital age has given war what it always desired: efficiency. But in making it efficient, we have made it endless. As long as conflict generates profit, peace will remain an interruption, not a goal. The future of warfare is not about who has the most soldiers or even the most drones, but who owns the systems that decide when they fly. And as artificial intelligence learns to predict, analyze, and command, we may one day wake to a battlefield that no human ever chose. In the silence of servers and satellites, the wars of tomorrow are already being fought, not for land, not for glory, but for control of the invisible empires built on data and money. From the first blade carved in stone to the silent hum of a drone above a sleeping city, the story of war has never truly changed. The tools evolve, the uniforms shift, but the purpose remains the same: to acquire power, to secure resources, and to control the flow of wealth. Every age has found its own currency of conquest: bronze and slaves, gold and oil, data and attention. Humanity has refined the art of destruction until it resembles an economy: efficient, global, and profitable. The cost of war is counted not only in lives but in ledgers. Money funds it and money feeds from it. Nations borrow to fight, industries rise to supply, and the line between defense and greed dissolves into calculation. There are no victors in the balance sheet of history, only investors, and the silence of those who could not afford to compete. Yet war endures because it sustains us. It drives invention, it fuels ambition, and it justifies power. From Caesar to Churchill, from generals to algorithms, war has always served as the mirror of our civilization, showing not our strength, but our hunger. We have conquered continents, split atoms, and written laws against our own destruction, and still, we return to it. Because beneath strategy and ideology, war offers what peace cannot: the illusion of purpose, the rhythm of control, and the movement of money. The evolution of warfare is, in truth, the evolution of mankind's relationship with power. From swords to drones, we have learned to kill with precision, but not with understanding. The battlefield has expanded until it includes us all: our economies, our technologies, our beliefs. We live within the infrastructure of conflict, sustained by industries that profit from our fear. The soldier, the engineer, the financier, the citizen, all are shareholders in an enterprise that never truly closes. But if war is the cost of civilization, perhaps knowledge is its only refund. To understand war is not to glorify it, it is to expose it. Every battle tells us who we were and warns us who we might become.